This month's Where Did the Road Go is brought to you by 8 amazing people. Greg Ross, Billuminati, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, Michael Fritschke, Dr. O in Teberg, and Doug Malam. Thank you all so very much for helping make this show possible.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight, it's been far too long, but the Snake Brothers are back. Russ and Kyle,
back.
Russ and Kyle, otherwise known as Snake 1 and 2.
Snake 1 reporting in. Snake 2 here. Man, it's been a long time. It's great to be back on the show.
I think we were discussing this before we started recording. I think the last time we talked was when I came on your show with Marty.
Yeah, that's right.
And I don't know when that was, but it was a while ago.
Yep.
It was this year, I
back
think.
In the feed to find out. Yeah. What episode is this for you? Are you even tracking your numbers anymore?
I've never tracked my numbers. I always do it by date.
Oh.
Remember, I came from radio, so I didn't, numbering them didn't make sense. Just putting a date on them made sense, an air date,
Okay. Well, in my Where Did the Road Go Patreon feed, it says there's 1,000 something posts.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah,
that's quite a number. We just passed our 300 milestone on our show.
Well, you were on the anniversary show in January. Was it last January or the year before?
Oh yeah,
it was well over 1,000 episodes at that point.
It could have been a year before.
Huh?
Could that have been a year before? I think it was last January.
I think it was
like it was that.
I think it was last January, but time's really fuzzy at this point.
It's true.
I don't think it was this most recent January. I think it was the one before that. Yeah.
My God.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Yeah, because I remember Seriah telling me he was like, I'm having somebody else on, but you guys were on last time.
Yeah.
Yep.
How dare you?
Yeah.
Well, I think so. Okay, so this would have been the 10th anniversary. So I had Josh and Red Pill on.
Yeah, that's right.
Because
that's right.
They've been a part of the show since near the beginning, so that made sense.
Yes.
And I had you guys on for the 9th anniversary. So yeah, it was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And I forget what the point of that was. Oh, so at that point you had asked me how many episodes I did, and I didn't know. So while we were doing it, I pulled up my folders that have all the files in it and counted them, not counting the Patreons. And there were over 1,000 at that point.
Yeah. Wow.
That's amazing.
And sometimes you publish 2 a week, sometimes just 1.
Yeah, it varies.
Yeah.
And there's usually Patreon content for every show, and I think I started doing the Patreon in like 2015 or so.
Yeah.
When Patreon was new.
Right.
So
you started doing your Patreon content a year before we actually started our show, I think.
Okay.
And yeah, because I think we started in 2016.
And now it just feels like you've always done it, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. It's like completely a part of our lives.
Yeah.
And has vastly changed our entire lives.
Yep.
It's crazy. Yeah.
I mean, I could say the music show did that to me at one point, but I think this did it even more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the number of people you talk to, the ideas that get passed around, but for us also, it's the travel. Like suddenly we're going to these places with whole groups of people who are interested in it in the same way that we are. Spending 2 weeks in Egypt, which is like a kind of like top of the bucket list dream that you just wonder if you're ever going to get to do. And then suddenly we're doing it on a regular basis in the most awesome way possible.
Right.
It's like, go podcasting. That's all I can say.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And unfortunately, podcasting is now being filled out by, commercial entities and AI and things like that, which just muddy the waters and make good content harder to find.
Yeah.
But
yep, that's true. But I mean, you're totally right about that. And I just try not to worry about it. I'm
not worried about it.
Yeah, I know you're not, but I'm just saying, like, we're doing what we love, and it's so much fun, and it's made such a huge impact on our lives, and we've got this amazing community around us, just like you do around your show.
Yeah.
And it's just so awesome. It's really cool.
Yeah, that's the thing. The community especially is it's not something I ever imagined having.
Yeah.
And again, compared to the music show, I mean, there's a community around that, but it's a lot looser and it doesn't have the same support structure.
Yeah.
So yeah, this.
But it's also heavy metal, right? Don't you aren't you afraid of dying all the time with the heavy metal show?
Why?
I'm just
The heavy metal embraces death.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. I see. No, that's why you're not afraid of death, because you're just used to it.
That's all you talk about. That's all we write music about.
There are, and I've mentioned this before, there are a number of studies now that have shown that people who grew up listening to metal are better adjusted on average because they deal with all these dark themes and stuff. It's not as traumatic for them when they encounter them in real life.
Ah, that's interesting.
So
I did not know that.
Yeah. So all the warnings back in the 80s of it's going to make it's going to screw you up is actually the opposite.
Yeah,
it's like therapy.
Just trying to troll you with some stereotypes here.
Yeah, I know.
You're not letting me do it. That's fine.
Because I think it's hilarious that you have these psychological studies that are like, heavy music actually seems to be good for people. It's like, really? So getting out your aggressions and connecting with negative emotions isn't actually necessarily a bad thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I recently saw some meme online about the people who write the darkest heavy metal, like from Norway or whatever, and then it shows a picture of their house, and it's in this like absolutely gorgeous valley in the mountains with a lake and all this stuff, and like this is where they live,
and more often than not, they probably have a cat.
Yeah. But of course, other people came on and they're like, "Yeah, it looks like that for 3 weeks."
Right.
The rest of the time, it's a winter hell. Yeah.
The rest of the time, it's darkness.
Right.
So you have been to Turkey.
Yes.
And when did you go there?
April of this year.
Okay. And obviously you went to go yeah. Let me try words again. Words are very difficult.
They are.
Gobekli Tepe.
That's right.
What else did you go see while you were there?
Well, we based the whole thing out of Şanlıurfa, which is the nearest city to Gobekli Tepe. And Karahan Tepe is there also.
Okay.
It's a little farther away, and it's not nearly like Gobekli Tepe now has kind of been. This is what Graham Hancock was upset about. This it's been touristized. I guess
it has.
They've spent millions of dollars on a beautiful sort of tourist center there with a tiny museum in it and a kind of really strange multimedia experience.
Strange.
What would you even call that thing?
Yeah, you go into a little curved sort of circular walkway in the dark. It's like a theater, and you're walking and there's video projection on the walls
and the floor.
And
yeah,
it's kind of showing you this environment of
the
woods and these indigenous butt flap bearing spear holding people kind of walking up and worshiping and painting red ochre and then moving rocks and and then burying, right? There's then all the rocks start falling from the ceiling down into the floor and it's like they're burying the site and all this. It's very artistic to try to paint this environment of ritual and I don't know.
I have to admit it's pretty cool, when the pillars show up and then there's fire and they start dancing and the music is like, it's loud too. Like when you're in there, the music is, they've got a really expensive stereo system or whatever.
It's very artistically done in the sense of there's then suddenly you're seeing all these hands waving around like they're worshiping and it's just strange.
Yeah, it's weird.
It sounds kind of cool though.
It is cool.
It is, yeah.
It is cool. But, we're more interested in what is the real story here?
Yeah,
this is obviously a story created by the archaeologists.
The early archaeologists.
That are basically telling us that hunter-gatherers built the site and it was a site for worship and that they buried it intentionally. So, it is cool though. I can't, I'm not going to knock it.
Yeah, and they did a good job on the whole area. It is, Graham Hancock and other people were pretty upset about the roof, the massive sort of roof that was put over the site.
Why? I like the roof.
But when you go, because it, Graham is like, it disconnects it from the sky and there's all these alignments, right? And like you used to be able to go out there and you could stand there and in the dark and it's connected to the night sky and everything. But man, when you're there and you see the context of the site, you're like, okay, I get it. because we actually arrived. You remember there was a massive earthquake.
Yeah.
There was a huge earthquake. It caused a ton of damage in Şanlıurfa and the surrounding area. And then there was a flood like a few weeks later. They had a massive rainstorm come through when they were still searching for people from the earthquake. And then there was a flood, and it flooded the whole city area and caused a bunch more people to die. And it actually, so this was bad for us because when we were there,
people were already living in tents.
yeah,
Because their houses had been completely destroyed. So all these people are out like living under tents, and then they get this massive inundation of rain.
Like a biblical proportion amount of rain.
These poor people.
Yeah. And what sucked for us was that, by the time we got there, they had fixed a lot of things, but you could still see remnants of the earthquake damage, like the tops of the minarets of the mosques were broken. There were sections of road that had collapsed. Still, they were trying to fix stuff. But the flood, the museums, it turned out, that contained, tens of thousands of artifacts that have been taken from Gobekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe that give you because it's when you go to these sites, and this happens in Egypt also, you go to the temple, and the temple is now, it's a bunch of giant blocks of stone with carvings in it or whatever. But when they were being excavated, they were full of artifacts, and all of those artifacts are in museums, right? So you have to go to the museum to see the artifacts to get the full picture of what the site was like. But the museums, it turned out, were built in a floodplain near the city.
Oh.
So they started to fill up with water, and there was like this emergency effort to move and create all these priceless, incredibly ancient artifacts out of the museum and store them somewhere where they wouldn't be destroyed by the floodwaters. And when we got there, the museums were still closed because all the artifacts were still cased up somewhere in storage. So we didn't get to see any of that stuff.
Oh, man. That sucks.
Yeah. All the strange statues and the carvings and, from all the different... we didn't get to see any of it. But we did get to the sites. We got to go see Gobekli twice and Karahan Tepe twice as well. We got to see Nimrut Dagi, which is an amazing site.
Not familiar with that one.
It's a I'm sure you've seen pictures of it. It's got these sort of strange Persian carvings, seated figurines with the heads have all been broken off and they're sitting on the ground.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah, and it's way up at the top of one of the highest mountains in the mountain range there. Like, you have to do this crazy. It was a
giant bird heads, giant people heads.
Yeah, and the people are wearing pointed hats.
Yeah, okay.
Phrygian caps.
Yeah, Phrygian caps. But the most interesting thing about it is not the statues, but the fact that the statues are actually sort of, relatively speaking, these tiny artifacts that are in place around this enormous pile of artificial gravel that actually makes up the entire mountaintop.
Man-made pile of
It's
gravel.
a man-made pile of gravel, and it is absolutely monstrous, right? It's huge, and it's clear that it's covering something. Something is underneath.
It's pyramid size.
Yeah.
It's just massive.
Huh. And we have no idea what's under it.
No, they just tell you, like, well, it's the tomb of this guy who made these statues. It's a classic, standard sort of assumption story. But the thing is that this pile of gravel is actually the most perfect conception of like how to hide something, because you can't dig into it without the rest, whatever's above collapsing down. You'd have to remove all the gravel basically to get to whatever.
Or some way shore it up.
Yeah.
As you're digging in, it would just collapse.
Yeah, the gravel itself is already at it's the angle it's at slope failure. So if you pull some out, the stuff above collapses down into the place where you made the hole, right? So you can't dig into it without removing all of it.
Now, you said it's pyramid size. What kind of pyramid?
I'm just trying to, people, if you haven't been to a pyramid, I guess that is not a really good reference. It's just it's huge, it's enormous.
Yeah.
In other words,
is it Great Pyramid sized or like one of the smaller pyramids?
Maybe it's like Menkaure.
Okay.
So the smaller of the three big ones on Giza.
Okay, so that's pretty huge.
It's huge.
It could be bigger than that because we've walked around Menkaure, and I don't think it took us as long as it took us to walk around the pile of gravel on. It's the whole mountaintop, right?
Yeah.
It looks like somebody went up there. They found the tallest mountain in this massive mountain range, and they went up there and carved something into the mountaintop, and then covered it in gravel until the mountain was pointy again. Right.
That's the other interesting thing about it, is that the slopes all around it are very steep. So the gravel basically is sitting atop the mountain, and it's the gravel pile is steep itself, and then it just ends in steep slopes.
Yeah.
that continue down the mountain. So it's like they had to cart all this gravel up there.
Yeah. Where did the gravel come from? Where did they get it? Like, what is it covering up?
There's one outcrop on one end that definitely looks like it had been massively quarried.
Yeah.
But other than that, I don't know.
It makes me wonder if there's a Hall of Records type of thing under it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
That's
yes.
exactly what we talked about when we were up there. We went with Ben from Uncharted X, and so we were all discussing this idea because all of us are interested in the idea of an ancient civilization and the fact that they may have purposefully left behind places where they were trying to preserve artifacts from their civilization through some kind of destruction, like possibly the Younger Dryas period,
And also theft.
Yeah, and theft, right? And
Yeah.
so, and then also, you kind of want to build something where it's like you can't get to this without a certain amount of cooperation and ability, right? And so, one way to do that is to make a giant pile of gravel that you can't move by yourself. And I mean, the archaeologists, I guess it was maybe 40 years ago, they made an attempt to dig into it, and then they just said it was too dangerous, right? Because it keeps collapsing. And if it collapses enough, you can have like a kind of an avalanche effect, and it'll push people down the mountain.
Ugh.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that would take a massive undertaking to actually uncover that, which is probably
Yeah.
the whole point. I mean, why make something like that if you're not trying to, I don't know, like either
And
hide.
Dude, it's literally in the most unbelievably rugged, inhospitable area you've ever seen. Like you standing at the site, looking down into the stuff that's around it, and it's just pointy, rocky crags. There's no roads, right? You're just like, who came out here and made this enormous pile of gravel? And where's I mean, are we supposed to believe that that a more primitive culture shipped a bunch of dudes out here and just had them breaking rocks for, I don't know, 20 years to
Right.
make, and the gravel it looks sifted. Like how you make modern gravel, you crush rocks and then you put it through a sifting process so that you get large ones and medium ones and small ones, and they're
Right.
all kind of so when you end up getting gravel delivered to your house for your driveway or something, you have a certain size, and you can know that because it's been sifted, that every piece of rock is going to be roughly the same size as all the rest of them.
Yeah.
Roughly the same size and smaller.
Yeah.
In some cases. It just depends. But
Yeah.
you're not going to get any larger depending on the size of your sieve.
Right. And so there's this huge pile of gravel, and it looks regular, like a
very
modern
regular.
gravel pile.
Looks like it was put up there by a what do they call it? Like a grain lift or something, like an auger.
Yeah. Where it lit,
It's just pouring it in the center, and it just builds this giant.
It's
conical
crazy,
shape.
dude, to walk around this and you're just looking at this massive pile of gravel and you're like, okay, who did this?
How did they take the last wheelbarrow of gravel to the top
Yeah.
and put it up there to where it has the same slope?
Yeah.
Well, maybe they just pulverized what was there and turned it into gravel.
Yeah.
But to pile it, this is what I'm saying, is that like to make a pile at this steepness that is symmetrical
and pointy. right? Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have to be continually putting it in the center.
On the top, in the center, and then the rest of it, every time you pour some on there, it sort of slides down, and you keep pouring it, and it makes it taller very slowly.
I mean, I guess
Okay.
you could pour it in stages with a flat, like sort of truncated top, but at some point you have to build scaffolding to
Yeah.
get it up there because it's so high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's way
To
up
get
there.
the gravel to the top, you would have to have scaffolding around it to transport the gravel to the top of it to continue building this thing up, and then to make a point. It's just, it's not simple.
Yeah. It's not a trivial task.
Yes.
Completely aside from actually manufacturing the gravel itself, just piling it up in the way that it is a very difficult job without machines. The same issue that we have with a lot of these ancient sites, where you're just like, how did they do this?
Yeah.
If it was done by hand, and you kind of get this story like, okay, they had donkeys, and you sling the 2 bags of gravel over the donkey's back, and then the donkey walks up the pile, and then you pour the bags out, and you're just like, well, no, you can't do that forever because it's too steep. So. It is an interesting site, and like it was crazy to be able to stand there at the base of this and just because they've done some scans and they have found that there's at least 3 voids inside this pile of gravel somewhere that no one has ever accessed since they were made.
Interesting.
Right? Because if they had accessed them, the gravel would be gone.
Right.
It's never
right.
been pillaged. It's never been plundered. No one has ever made it into these, and the archaeologists are like, yeah, there's some voids in there. It's probably the tomb of the king that made these statues out here. But the other possibility is that the statues are out there because the king knew, based on old legends or maybe some other stuff that he had, that there was something here from an ancient civilization, and he built these statues to honor this site or to associate himself with this place of the gods or the ancients, right?
Yeah. I feel like if you're going to go through that much trouble, I mean, sure, it could be a burial, but I think we assume too much stuff is burials without really any evidence around it.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is the type of thing you either do because you want this information hidden until someone advanced enough can uncover it, or you want it hidden forever because it's like the real Necronomicon or something. And
Yes. Yeah.
There's a podcast I listened to, an audio fiction podcast. I think it was called Derelict. And the concept they had was that there was this giant door they found on the ocean floor. And it's like millions of years old, and they're trying to open the door, and the door turns out to be a prison. And that's why it was like in this totally inaccessible area on the planet, and it was put there before there was like, any major life on the planet.
So a prison for something off-world.
Yes. Yeah, I don't want to give away too much if anyone wants to listen to it, but I mean...
What is it called? I'll listen to it.
Derelict.
Derelict, okay.
And actually, that's not even the Derelict story. It starts off with an episode where they find this thing in space, but then they didn't do anything. It was weird. They didn't do anything with it for a long time. And then finally they came, and then instead of doing Derelict, they did... I forget what it's called. Hang on. It's under the Derelict. They did the Fathom is the one that is about under the thing under the water, but it's under the Derelict podcast. So it's like the prequel to the podcast they still haven't done. So
there's a similar theme in I don't know if you've heard of these. Maybe somebody's mentioned them to you. The Dresden Files is a whole series of. I think there's like 20 something books in this. It's great.
There was a TV show too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know anything about the TV show, but I went through all the books. It's like fiction, and it's kind of like this guy's a magician, and they put him in the modern context, and he's a wizard, and he's also a private detective. And anyway, he ends up controlling, and he's in Chicago, right? He ends up controlling an island that is also, it's the same thing, a prison built by Merlin to house like these really awful paranormal entities for all time, right? And it's the same thing. He kind of discovers it, and it's this ancient thing filled with crazy magic that he doesn't understand because Merlin built it, and the thing is, it's 4-dimensional, so he can't even see most of it. And it's a similar concept. And then he gets in there and he sees some of the inmates and he's like, oh my God, like, no wonder it's so well protected.
So the TV series was 2000, it looks like 2009 to 2010. It only did 13 episodes.
Yeah.
And it says, Harry Dresden is a wizard, the only one listed in the Chicago phone book. He's got a handle on the crimes that can't be solved by anyone else. Paranormal, no problem. Dresden deals in all matters of supernatural threats.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's hilarious too because he's he gets phone calls from people like, "Are you for real?"
Right.
He's like, "Yeah."
I like I said, I watched the TV series and I remember enjoying it. 2007 to 2008. That's what it was on.
Oh well, I know you're a reader, so you would love the books. I mean, I devoured them one after the other because they were so great. So.
Man, there's tons of high ratings on the show too. Has a 7.6 out of 10 on IMDb.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean,
the books are really good.
The idea that they could have, buried something that they don't want anyone to get to.
Yeah. Did you want to show? I mean, I know you're not recording video, but Kyle can at least show you some pictures that we got here so you can see what we're talking about. Does Skype allow you to show pictures?
Yeah, you can send a picture through Skype.
Yeah, I was going to send a picture, but I was looking at this video that it's like, I just need to take a screenshot of it. So I'll get it to you.
Yeah. Yeah, just so you can see. Well, so anyway, we went to Nimrut, which is like, in the standard archaeological story, Nimrut is not ancient. I mean, it's ancient, but it's not anything like Gobekli Tepe.
Okay.
More like 2,000 years old. At least that's how they date all the statues. But once again, when you're up there and you're just looking at the platforms and the statues around this massive pile of gravel, which to me, the pile of gravel is the artifact that's the origin of all this. But the archaeological story is that all of this was set up to be the tomb of this king that no one liked. We were told by our guide, a great dude, Ramazan. He said Nimrut or Nimrod, right? The biblical, like in the Bible they refer to him Nimrod. He gave this whole explanation about how that's not the person's name. That's what this culture, these people called any king who was terrible, like just an awful, despotic or incompetent ruler. They called him a Nimrut.
Interesting.
So it's a title. It means a bad king. Right.
I mean, that makes sense.
So, yeah. So it's named after a bad king, the whole site. And apparently this king had commissioned these statues to be built up here. But it's interesting because the statues have their own kind of construction style and artistic style. But then there's like platforms made of a completely different kind of stone in a completely different style in an ancient wall that like has this beautiful sort of interlocking. I can't really describe it. There's a wall, remnants of a wall that go around that are made of big megalithic slabs that interlocked in this very interesting sort of I don't know, like a Tetris fashion. It's mostly collapsed now, but it looks completely different from the statues.
Huh.
And then you have this enormous pile of gravel, right? And so the archaeological story is in the pile of gravel is the tomb of this king who commissioned all this stuff to be built up here. And then the platform of this other different kind of rock and the wall was all for ceremonies or something. It's not really well explained, but when you're walking around up there, you just get the sense that it's something more complex, and maybe it's similar to other sites where people have been building on this area for a long time or using it because there's this very ancient thing here, which is and then they have legends associated with it, like within the mountaintop here is remnants of the ancients.
Oh, okay. Looking at the pictures you sent, that is one hell of a pile of gravel.
Yeah, so the first one Kyle sent there, where you're looking at the mountaintop from far away, and you can see that pile of gravel is the top of the mountain.
Yeah,
right? It's huge. Yeah, and then when you get up next to it, you're like, wow, okay, this is an enormous object.
What did you Google to find these?
He took them from our photographs.
Oh, okay.
But you can Google.
But you can look up Nimrut
Dagi.
Want to spell that for people?
Nimrut. Yeah.
Yeah. Dagi. 2 words.
I'm not sure I actually have heard of this before.
Yeah, it's been a site of interest to me for a long time because of the same thing. Because I looked at the pictures and everybody's focusing on these like sort of Phoenician statues, and I'm like, but what about this massive pile of obviously artificial pile of gravel in the background
with voids in it? That's the important thing. Like if they scanned it and it was solid, it'd be like, okay,
scan Nimrut project. Drill down, go down the mountain, drill it way into the side of the mountain underneath this thing.
You want the muon detectors down there?
Put the muon detector into the drill hole and leave it there, and let's see what kind of voids are underneath this thing.
And so they clearly spent quite a bit of money working on this site too. There's a big welcome center. Actually, it was interesting because the place was closed to the public when we were able to get in because our guide down there is well connected. But it basically had been, the road leading up to it was covered in snow, so no one could get there. And then they finally it warmed up a little bit and the snow melted, and so the road opened up, but it still wasn't open to the public. But he got us in. But the whole welcome center with whatever artifacts and everything in that museum was closed, so we just got to walk around the site. But it was interesting to see this in the context of Gobekli Tepe, and especially when you're thinking along the lines of like, what is Gobekli and Karahan Tepe really?
Yeah, this is a place where the most ancient stone builders.
Yeah, the most known. Yeah, the most ancient known megalithic stone builders were operating in this area, and then there's this huge pile of gravel
and
in
also
the mountains.
On a massive scale. This is not Gobekli Tepe is not a one-off.
Yeah, there
are numerous sites with the same artistic design, the same type of megalithic circles, same high relief carvings, all around Şanlıurfa in the what are called the Germush mountain ranges. The stone hills, the Taj Tepeler is what they call the stone hills. It's like all these barren limestone, eroded limestone hills. And there's just these places where it's green because there's a huge mound there. And underneath these mounds are these giant buried stone circles. And there's a bunch of them.
Yeah, we were told when we were there that somewhere between 40 and 80 additional sites aside from Gobekli Tepe. And I'm not talking about other circles in Gobekli Tepe, but actual other additional mounds that would be an entire other Gobekli Tepe site have been discovered.
And I've heard
they're just not excavated.
Yeah, I've heard that there's 12. But then, our guide was saying there may be 40 and even some people say 80.
Yeah.
So it's just it's totally unknown. And the thing about this is this area it's been studied for a long time, but obviously it's the Fertile Crescent. It's this whole, there's a lot of other sites that are many, many miles away that are connected in the type of art. So it's not really known how vast the maybe call it a civilization that was constructing these sites like Gobekli Tepe. We don't know how big it is. We don't know how far reaching it is, because these mounds have been just previously thought of as like burial sites or
just a pile
cemeteries
of
midden mounds. No one ever thought that they were megalithic sites. So now that it's kind of, okay, wow, there's something amazing here. Like, people are looking to see more. And of course, the resources to do these massive digs are not always there to just go, but they're sort of just kind of looking around and saying, okay, there's a bunch of these.
Yeah.
So it's going to be decades
At
before any real understanding of the vastness of this artistic style, these stone circles, and the timeline. Because now, with Karahan Tepe, which is nearby, relatively close to Gobekli Tepe. I can't remember how far
you can
exactly.
Yeah, you can. I think they were talking about you can walk. Is that where you can hike from there to the
we could hike from Karahan to what's the site with the multiple temples?
I can't remember.
Anyway, we'll think of it in a minute.
Yeah.
But these sites, they're all in the same context. They're like very close to the same context. They're up in these hills. There is one that's down in the valley that's been excavated, but these T-pillars are showing up everywhere.
Yeah.
Basically, they're the T-pillars that are, famously of Gobekli Tepe are in all these sites. Not Nimrut, but it's just looking at this in the context. And Nimrut was quite a drive. That was a pretty good haul that we took.
Yeah, it was basically an all-day trip.
Yeah. But that's my point here is looking at this in the context of this whole region having a civilization that's big enough to create these gigantic sites like Gobekli Tepe, which only maybe 20% of it has been excavated at this point. It's huge. The place is like 1,000 feet across. The mound on top of this hill at Gobekli Tepe is like 1,000 feet across.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that I think you were kind of getting to, is that similar to Nimrut, the Gobekli Tepe originally was a pile of gravel on top of a stone hill.
Yeah, basically it's a pile of midden.
Yeah, it's midden instead of just gravel, so it has grass and stuff growing on. It's actually fertile because it's a big pile of ancient trash. It's got animal bones and all kinds of stuff in it, ashes, right? So it was green, and it is green, and it's like they have apple orchards up there because
olives,
sorry.
Now, where is this?
This is at Gobekli Tepe.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Gobekli Tepe is an enormous midden mound. The pillars themselves, the circular enclosures, are under this mound. This is,
Well, yeah, because didn't a farmer find it because he hit it with his tractor or whatever?
Yeah, well, this is, in a way. These places have been farmed for a long time.
Yeah.
Because it's like suddenly there's all this fertile soil at the top of a mountain.
Yeah.
Where everywhere else, it's almost the bare bedrock.
Yeah.
With like grasses in the little crevices of the rocks.
Yeah, it's crazy how barren it is out there. We just happened to be there after the whole area got an enormous amount of rain, so it was beautiful and green and there were flowers, but our guy was like, dude, most of the time it's dry and everything is brown or yellow, but we were out there, all the pictures look gorgeous, but it's
which was great because it gives you the contrast to see the depth. Like you can see this mound. You can see the midden mound of Gobekli Tepe from a distance because it's so green. Where everything around it has all these white patches because it's just bedrock sticking out.
Rock.
Gotcha.
But this mound is literally, it's like 15 meters deep and
300 meters across. It's a massive mound.
Yeah, so almost 50 feet deep of dirt that has been placed there by humans.
Occupation.
So
they're occupation layers.
So this is the thing. Why bury them?
So this is the thing. Like the burial, it became pretty obvious that this was, to me, first of all, the mound itself is not necessarily intentional. This is a fine line. The burial is a natural process of occupation, right? So when humans come and stay at a place, they're bringing resources, they're bringing foods, they're bringing materials, dirt, rocks, whatever they're doing, they're gardening. I don't know what
animals are there. Yeah, they got
animals,
dung,
manure,
human
waste, and slowly over time, over thousands of years, in many cases, like in midden mounds here in Texas, for example, you could find a midden mound that's 10 feet deep that consists of artifacts that span like 12,000 years. So this mound in its deepest parts is 50 feet deep. And these are occupation layers of the same type. It's like all of these flint chips from them working flint. They're working basalt into grinding stones. They're building fires. The fires are cracking the limestone cobbles. Those are strewn about everywhere. So there's, like Russ said, there's animal bones from cooking. There's they were grinding grains. There's all kinds of activity going on here over a long period of time, and it builds up this giant mound. The context of the megaliths, however, is what confuses the whole thing.
Yeah, because they're at the bottom of the mound.
The megaliths are attached to the bedrock.
Yeah.
Okay.
At the bottom of the mound. So were these megaliths buried by occupation layers, just like any other midden, or were they intentionally, like, were the rings there and they were just like, they decided, well, let's just bury these? Well, if they did decide to bury them, they buried them in midden. They buried them with the material of the occupation layers that existed at the site.
Okay.
It's like it would be like it'd be like burying a church with the stuff from the dump. It's very weird, right? That's what it's like. They're buried in trash basically, but it's the kind of trash that just is generated over a long, like, I'm sure you've heard of digs in caves where people lived in the cave for a long time, and there can be many feet of material, and the people just keep living on top of it, and the stuff over time, over generations, just builds up, and the cave ceiling is getting closer and closer to your head, right? And eventually, sometimes, and we've been to mounds like this where you just have the people just stopped occupying the cave because the midden has filled it up to the point where you can't get in there anymore, right? And sometimes they dig it out and push it out, but then rains come and it collapses back in, right? And the cave becomes uninhabitable, basically, or even if it's just a shelter, right? A rock shelter. It's just the midden builds up to the point where you can't use it anymore unless you dig it out of there. So the Gobekli Tepe is at the very bottom of this enormous occupation mound. Like, in other words, the kind of stuff that builds up from a lot of people living in the same place for a long time.
So to be clear, we don't think it was intentionally buried. And actually, the scientific literature is slowly moving away from that idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Even though that's been the most popular idea.
And it is the idea that is popularized at the site itself.
Yes.
Like some of the archaeologists now, the ones who are working on the site, like Jens Notroff, is that his name? He's one of the lead guys, I think. He's complaining that there was basically what he called it was helpful, but there was a massive sort of media campaign about Gobekli Tepe that went worldwide that included the ideas from the early archaeologists that it was intentionally buried on all this kind of stuff. And he's like, this is no longer the case with the leading archaeology. We don't think it was intentional, that it looks more like collapses of this midden mound that slid in and filled in these enclosures.
Now,
but that raises other questions, right? It's weird, like, because now you're imagining somebody is building up midden around the mounds to the point to where it's going to collapse in.
Yeah.
Because midden doesn't just show up. You don't manufacture it. It requires, you can't build it. In other words, it's the result of thousands of years of occupation.
Yeah.
So and it's clear because of the fact that the megaliths are at the bottom of it, that those probably, the most likely scenario there is that the megaliths themselves predate the midden.
Right.
Well, there's multiple lines of evidence here. One is that the midden itself, the dirt and the rocks and the gravel and everything that the megalithic pillars have been buried in has been dated based on the artifacts at the very bottom of the midden.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
So you can go to the very bottom of the midden, and there's flint artifacts that are the same styles and types of flint artifacts with the lithics, stone artifacts, that they have found all over the Levant, the Fertile Crescent, the
There's
whole
a
area.
huge region of this same
where
style.
Hunter-gatherers that were in that massive region for thousands of years made those lithics at this time range. And that time range takes you back to this, roughly 12,000 years ago. And that's at the bottom of the midden. But there's the possibility that somebody could have come and excavated the midden down all the way to the bedrock and then built Gobekli Tepe.
Right.
Built these giant megaliths, right? Well, the megaliths are not the only structures there. There are other structures that are made of simple cobblestone walls that they sort of they're beautifully done, but they're not carved stone. They're not megalithic. They're sort of, you think bowling ball size and maybe some boulders, like some slightly larger rocks.
I'm sure you've seen like natural, or not natural, but like farmer rock walls there.
They
in
look
New
like
York.
that.
Yeah, they look like that.
Rock walls, beautifully built, square, flat surfaces, but the rocks themselves are cobbles that are very different shapes, every one. They had mortar, and those rock walls butt up and sometimes surround the megalithic pillars. So it's obvious that those rock walls were built after the megalithic pillars were stood up. And they have carbon dated grasses and things that are in the mortar at the very bottoms of those rock walls. And those also date to the same period as the oldest lithics at the bottom of the so these pillars, these megaliths have to be that old, but they don't have to be that young.
Right.
They can be much older than the cobblestone walls, which look like a later renovation.
A lot of times the walls actually cover whole sections of beautiful carvings in the pillars, right?
Which pillars are carved, and then the rock wall just completely covers that carving.
Which doesn't seem like something you would do if you're the original person making the carvings. You're not like, okay, let's build it, let's carve all this beautiful stuff and then cover it with this crappy rock wall.
Right,
you know?
right.
Yeah.
So then you have to rule out the possibility that somebody just came and excavated this midden mound, which was 50 feet deep, which took thousands of years to accumulate, and then built Gobekli Tepe and those rock walls. Maybe that happened, but it had to have happened 12,000 years ago, roughly. But then that brings into question, well, why is the midden and all of the other just archaeological sites around the area that don't have Gobekli Tepe style megaliths, but that have this midden and these lithics, they have been dated contextually with a lot of other evidence at that time. So it just, to me, it has to push the actual megalithic construction of Gobekli Tepe further back, at least by maybe a generation.
Yeah.
At least, because that site had to be there, and then hunter-gatherers came to that site.
Yeah, and occupied it.
And that's when the midden began to be built.
Okay.
And so then you move forward, and maybe those hunter-gatherers kept excavating the midden to try to keep these circular enclosures available. And then, like Russ was saying, a big flood happens and the midden collapses. Because when you're there, when you're walking around the current state of the site, the archaeologists have dug through 50 feet of this midden, and they are doing everything in their power to shore up the walls of the midden with sandbags and, modern built sort of cobblestone walls.
Yeah.
And then we got there right after a flood, and you could see
big streams of stuff from
streams of material that have been poured into the site from all of that rain. So it's constantly trying to rebury these sites.
Yeah.
So
That's interesting.
I do not think the place was ritually buried. There is other evidence that kind of led the initial archaeologists to believe that they were ritually buried. Part of that is that the midden within the circular enclosures was that their stratigraphy was inverted.
Yeah.
So the youngest flint points were at the bottom and the older flint points were at the top. But you can imagine that would happen
if there's a collapse.
Yeah.
The wall collapsed. Now they've dug in other places. There's another enclosure that they've dug at in Gobekli Tepe where they've found evidence of a previous excavation of the circular enclosure, and they found like a stairway or a ramp.
That's enclosure H.
In the midden mound, like a previous ramp that had been buried. Okay, so somebody had come there and excavated this circular enclosure thousands of years ago and had a ramp in the midden to get down into the enclosure.
And there's a weird thing with enclosure C, which is, if you remember from the pictures, there's three big enclosures sort of close to each other.
Yeah.
And one of them has two big T-pillars they're two big pillars, and they're actually very square. They have sharp pillars. They've got the central pillars have sharp edges, and they're broken, right? The tops of them are huge. These things pillars. They're absolutely enormous.
I believe they would have been the biggest.
Yeah. And the tops of them are crumbled and the pieces are all lying around them. And there's evidence that 6,000 years ago, somebody came and specifically targeted. They dug a pit straight down to those two central pillars and broke them on purpose.
At least that's what they say, that the pillars were destroyed on purpose. They call it
iconoclasty or something.
Yeah, iconoclastic action. So iconoclasm, meaning the purposeful destruction of symbolism or
artifacts of another culture. So somebody came and dug down and shattered the tops of these pillars on purpose 6,000 years after they were buried.
So we are not the first civilization to discover this site.
Yeah.
It's obvious that...
Well, it sounds like someone knew it was there.
Years in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just love this idea that somebody in the past may have heard legends of this, massive ancient site built by the gods that was located in these mountains, whatever, and they go out there and they find it and they dig down, maybe looking for treasure or whatever.
Yeah.
Something like that. I don't know. It's just,
there is a marker. So when you first come up to Gobekli Tepe, the site itself, when you get up to the area where you kind of get out of the bus that they bring you in, you can see this massive roof where the site itself is protected. But next to you, and it's kind of fenced off, there's a big circular flat platform that's been cut out of the bedrock, and it's out in the open. And it has at least one raised bedrock platform where if it looks similar to the other enclosures. In other words, there's one platform where a central T-pillar would have been
a pedestal.
The other T-pillars in the main site are all, the central ones are on pedestals that have been, when they're cut, they flattened the bedrock and they left these two pedestals for the two central pillars in each one of the enclosures. And there's this one out in front that it's not in the mound, right? The enormous midden mound is off away from this. So this is open. So it's like, this acts as a marker. Anybody who finds this you can look at it and tell somebody made this.
Right.
And then if you look and you see this enormous pile of stuff, then you can say, okay, like you could get an idea, right? That this might be a marker for this whole site. And if you can't see Gobekli Tepe if you were down the hill, but you would have been able to see this one. If this had been a similar circular enclosure with two pillars standing up on it and a circular pillars around it, it's at the edge of the cliff of the main hill where the whole site is. So you could see it from other hills or down in the valley.
Right.
So it's like
the archaeologists call it like a test.
Yeah,
site.
They're like, oh, they were testing it and they screwed it up.
I know.
We're just like, come on, man.
But that is one of the things that sort of, for me, the mind-blowing thing to kind of describe a little more about this. These pillars, like we said, they're set on the bedrock. Now you're on the peak of a hill, and these hills are, heavily eroded limestone hills. And so in order to build a circular enclosure, first they had to flatten and make a level surface like you would pour a slab. But they had to cut it out of the bedrock of the hill to make this flat level surface out of the bedrock. So they did that first. And they didn't just make it flat and level. They actually depressed it into the bedrock so that there was sort of like a curb all the way around the circular enclosure that stepped up. So you actually if you're going into the enclosure, you step down like off of a curb into this big circular enclosure, which might have filled with water and looked beautiful, reflecting the pillars themselves. The central pillars are on a raised pedestal. Again, this is bedrock, they didn't set rocks there. It's not like they set stones to raise it up. This is literally carved out of the bedrock. And the curbs themselves of these raised pedestals were carved in high relief in some cases with like beautiful birds. And then they cut a socket into the center of these two pedestals in the middle of the circle.
And slid the T-pillar.
Where the T-pillar literally slid into it like a key. It's wild. It's just incredible. So this is not a simple like, hey, let's drag this rock and stand it up somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, aren't they somewhat like very finely carved and thinner rock than we see other places?
Yes.
Yeah, and they're, except for the ones in enclosure C, the central pillars there, which are like, they're very square and have very sharp edges, like I was saying. Like, for example, the T-pillars of the most famous, the one you see with the two really tall, thin ones.
Yeah.
When you're actually walking around those, you see that they're also not completely straight. They have this interesting wavy.
It's so beautiful.
It's hard to describe, but they're not like perfectly flat and straight. They've actually got this kind of organic.
Yes, it's like an organic look. Some of them look like mushrooms.
Yep.
Growing up out of the bedrock.
Yeah, because they'll have this S curve, and then the top of the T-pillar is the top of the mushroom. And
it's a little angled. It's not perfectly flat and straight. It's like it's beautifully not symmetrical.
Yeah,
it's just it's wonderful the way they did this. And yet some of the high relief carvings, like there's one with a cat figurine just sticking off of there, probably like 8 inches or 10 inches. This beautiful sculpture that's sticking out off the edge of the pillar. And to do that, you would have had to have left a large mass of material on the main megalith when you cut it out. Like knowing, like, okay, we're gonna actually carve this into an actual sculpture of something.
Right.
So it's incredible the work that they did. I know a lot of people focus on Pillar 43, the Vulture Stone. This is the one that is connected to Martin Sweatman famously connected it to the zodiac.
Yeah.
The zodiacal constellations and the alignment of the sort of solar disk and all that. That's very interesting. But some of these other features with these, just massive high relief carvings show the workmanship, the skill and the planning that must have taken place. And now they're finding even further planning because what was initially thought was that that they would build one enclosure and then they partied there for 100 years or something, and then they're like, okay, this enclosure has served its time, let's bury it, and now let's build another one and another one and another. They would do this over and over, and now there are other scientists looking into the possibility and showing evidence that there was actually a master plan.
Yeah,
they are the circular enclosures are so close to forming a equilateral triangle from center to center that it seems incredibly unlikely that this was just random. Like, let's build a circular enclosure here. After that was buried, and then the next one. That it looks like there was a master plan for this whole thing. And of course, we haven't seen the whole thing. We've only seen 20% of this one site.
Yeah. And there's a kind of stylistic continuity across the whole site that implies the same builders, right? That it's not like a succession of things. It was like a single effort. But yeah, the geometry was very interesting because they were that paper. These guys were suggesting that to even plan this out and to build it in this way, where they're basically making a triangle out of these circular enclosures that are not actual perfect circles. They're more like ellipses.
Yeah.
That they were saying like, okay, so this requires math and also implies a kind of blueprint. In other words, you can't just do this. You can't do this like ad hoc or impromptu. You have to draw something somewhere, and then you have to have the ability to take your drawing and scale it up to fit the size of the building, right?
Surveying.
So this requires surveying. It requires math. It also implies the ability to construct a model that is scalable, even if the model is just a drawing, right? This is how we do modern buildings today. We have whole sheaves of drawings, and the drawings are using a specific measurement system that can be scaled upwards. Mm-hmm. And so you can look at this and say, I know that if I take my ruler and measure 1 inch here, that means 15 feet in the real world when I make the building or something like that, right?
So you have to have a system of measurement.
Yeah. And this would be the earliest known evidence of that kind of thing if it's true. So some very interesting work is being done on this.
Something like that did not appear from nowhere.
Right.
Yes. So
it's not like some, I guess you could imagine some one-off genius.
Yeah, maybe.
Who was just like, okay, I have all these ideas. First, I need a measurement system, and then I'm going to draw a model, and then we're going to build this. We're going to replicate this thing, and then he can talk his entire tribe into doing it with him. But where do you get the carving skills from?
Yeah.
This is obviously, when you're looking at the relief carvings on these, like, set aside the ability to cut out the megaliths and move them and stand them up and all that, and the construction and everything, and then just look at the sculpture, and you can see that this is generational knowledge, that this isn't somebody doing this for the first time.
Right, exactly. We just don't have the stuff that came before yet.
Right.
If it still exists. We got to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
All right.
All right, mid-show break here. The contact info. Everything is at wheredidtheroadgo.com. You can become a patron. It's only $3 a month. You get extra content every week, plus some extra special stuff thrown in. And if you want to send us a story for a listener stories episode, it's stories at wheredidtheroadgo.com, or just go to the website, look at the contact link. It has the mailing address. It has all the different emails. It has all the social media stuff, are what used to be Twitter, or now X, Facebook page, Facebook group, our Discord, everything's up there. Wheredidtheroadgo.com. All right, now a recommendation for this week. And my recommendation is a couple of books. And I listened to the first one of these on the way down to Albatwitch, and or at least some of it. It's 11 hours. It took me about 9 to drive it. So, Futuristic Violence and Fancy Suits. The first Zoe Ash novel by David Wong, who also wrote John Dies at the End, the 4 books of that. If you like John Dies at the End, you'll almost certainly like these. They have the same mixture of humor, wit, cleverness, just everything that's there. It's just a completely different story. It doesn't have the paranormal aspects that John Dies at the End does. It's more of a futuristic dystopia, I guess, is a good way to put it. But I started the first book, and I wasn't quite sure if I was going to get into it, and then I absolutely loved it. And I listened to the audiobooks. They were both really good. The other one is called Zoey Punches the Future in the Dick. Yes, that is the second book. And it's really funny to listen to the guy from Audible say that at the end, where he says, you have listen to an Audible reading of Zoey Punches the Future in the Dick. So it has that sort of humor to it. It's very brash at points, very clever, and very well written. And that's written, as I said, by David Wong, or I forget what his, Jason Pargin is his real name, which he's now starting to go under. So I think you can find it under both. And I highly recommend them. Like I said, if you like the John Dies at the End stuff, you'll almost certainly like this. It's the same mix of stuff. It's just there's nothing really paranormal about this one. And I very, very much enjoyed it. As soon as I got done with the first one, I went and listened to the second one. And was kind of disappointed when I got to the end, because now got to wait for him to write something else. All right. Anyway, back to the show. You are listening to Where Did the Road Go on WVBR FM Ithaca. Check us out on the web at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. So I'm here with the Snake Brothers on Where Did the Road Go? And I have so many questions.
Please.
Well, I'm not saying you have answers to them.
3, I'm not afraid.
So, man, I don't even know where to start. You mentioned so many things that then I wanted to ask you further questions about, but I didn't want to stop you.
Oh,
Well, can I say I want to go back to this one thing.
Yeah.
I am blown away by this revelation to me that these sites were not intentionally buried, because we spent so many years
Trying to figure that out.
wondering about this. How
Yeah.
did they bury this? And then I'm telling you that, being someone who has spent a lot of time on midden mounds and looking for artifacts and learning about midden and the accumulation of midden and the building up of midden, walking up to this site, it was immediately obvious that this was midden.
Yeah.
And I just right off the bat, I was like, wait a minute, this is a huge midden mound. So that was just, and then as we dug through the literature and read everything about the dating and looked at all of the newer stuff coming out and realizing that, like, no, this was not intentionally buried. That totally changes this, whatever this story is. So that's my favorite thing about what we learned there, that midden had to accumulate after these megaliths were erected.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you go to Cappadocia or any of those places?
We didn't get to do that.
we didn't get up there. Next time. We're definitely planning it for next time.
Because I think that's part of the puzzle as well, because that's not that far away.
Yeah, could be.
It definitely is part of the puzzle. This whole area is. I was just struck by the massive amount of sites in this area that have barely been scratched by the archaeologist's trowel, brushed by their toothbrush. It's just, there's so much to be done here. So yeah, I think there's going to be many revelations to come out of this area.
So what do you think the site was actually used for?
I have no idea. I'm open to the possibility that it was ceremonial or a work of art.
Okay.
Even.
Which
Why
again
not?
implies a very advanced culture.
Yeah.
But again, you have to consider that it's not the only site. So whatever this was, it was so prevalent that they built these T-shaped pillars all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't even really discussed Karahan, right? So that's the thing. Karahan Tepe,
Okay.
in some ways, is less. At first, you're like, okay, maybe this is less impressive than Gobekli Tepe. But then when you start to kind of walk around it and you realize what you're looking at, it almost, in some ways, you're like, okay, this is the same kind of endeavor. It's just not as well preserved, at least the part that we can see.
Gotcha.
A lot of the T-pillars that are scattered all over, and it was cool because you can walk all over this enormous hilltop, and there's just T-pillars sticking out of the ground.
Tops of T-pillars.
The tops of them, big, and you suddenly see one, and you're like, oh, that's the top of one, and then you realize there's another one there and there and there, and it makes a circle.
So you're standing at the top of the circle. This is why I kind of waffled a little bit about the story of the farmer who hit it with his plow, because because of sites like Karahan, where the tops of these things are sticking out everywhere. It's not like you didn't need a farmer to hit one with his plow. They all knew.
Yeah, they all know
about these giant rocks in circles.
And there are places in Karahan where you could see that farmers had tried to break them.
Yeah.
In other words, they tried to damage because they were, they wanted to plow, right?
Yeah,
and this
wanted
rock
to
is
get
in the
out of
way.
the way.
And they chip at it and chip at it, and so you can see there's a T-pillar here with the top of it that's been mauled by a pick or something. But there, the farmer doesn't know that it's a tall megalith, or maybe he figures it out while he's chipping away at it. That it's not just a boulder he can move.
You can see they were potholed around, like in other words, people try to dig around.
Yeah,
to get down to the bottom of it so that they could pull it out. But of course, they went like 4 or 5 feet down. It's still going.
Yeah.
It's like, nope. All right. Abandon this idea.
But the main part of Karahan that we can see right now is a huge circular flattened section in the bedrock. And the back, the one part of it has a whole set of like weird looking benches and T-pillars that are actually cut out of the rock. There are pillars and a bench and a curb and everything. And it's a big circle. And there's at least two.
Probably 100 feet across.
Yeah, it's massive. And then there's 2 pillars that are laying in the middle of it that have been shattered into a bunch of pieces. But they were massive. I mean, they were absolutely enormous, but they're heavily eroded. They're not well preserved. If they had carvings, they're completely gone. And at some point, they either fell or were purposefully destroyed, and they're broken into a bunch of pieces. So the archaeologists have kind of reconstructed them lying on the ground where you can see all the pieces, but the pillars were gigantic.
And we were told that Karahan is roughly dated now 500 years older than Gobekli Tepe.
Interesting. Not surprising, though.
Right. And this is, again, the dating is based on the lithics and it's not something where you can actually date these platforms or the megaliths themselves.
But they are, to credit to the archaeologists that are working on these, they are trying a lot of different dating methods. It's not, I mean, they're
not being lazy about it.
The fact that the stratigraphy of the midden is disturbed within these circles is what kind of prompted them to let's get more creative with how can we date this? And they tried many different methods, and it's just they're doing a lot of good work trying to figure this out. But like we were saying before, and
many of the papers we've read, they acknowledge, somewhere in the paper that this doesn't put a start date on the megaliths themselves.
They have this sort of it can't be any younger than this.
Yeah.
So they're not acting like Egyptologists, basically.
No, they're not
at all. It seems a lot more open.
Is that maybe because of the difference in cultures? Because it seems like a lot of the hesitation to make things older in Egypt is that the fear that it's taking it away from the Egyptian people.
It could be, yeah, because I mean the dates they have already is so far back that it takes it away from anyone who can conceivably lay claim to it, right?
Right.
Like whoever was building this is. The lithics that are being associated with the earliest dates, known as PPNA or Pre-Pottery Neolithic A, is a well-known and well-established sort of lithic type that they have been associating with a kind of hunter-gatherer kind of people that were in this area widespread right at the beginning of the Holocene, so 12,000 years ago.
Right.
So they're not connected to any current or modern or even pre-modern culture, right? And some of the sites, it's kind of like we were getting these interesting stories like, did locals here preserve some traditions about these sites? Because for the most part, it seems the sites are so old that no one has any idea, right? There's not even any myths or legends about them, right? But in some cases, there's some interesting stuff that implies that somebody in the cultures have been passing down some kind of information because of artwork similarities, tattoos that were commonly given to young women during a sort of coming of age ceremony, that imply that somebody was aware, at least they were aware of the sites themselves, but not necessarily that they had any myths about who made them.
Right.
Yeah.
So why, if these sites were known, did it take to the late 1990s before anyone paid attention and took a look at them?
Well, again, a midden mound is not the most interesting thing to archaeology, especially if they've dug in multiple midden mounds, right? So for example, if a team of archaeologists were working on a site and they found midden there and they dug to the bottom of the midden and they categorized all the lithic types and they had kind of established this, and then one of them walked around on a mound like Gobekli Tepe and saw these lithics, they would say, oh yeah, this is PPNB.
Another PPNB site.
This is the later, hunter-gatherers from PPNA.
Yeah.
And then if somebody dug down and found PPNA, lithic, it's it's sort of kind of, you can kind of get an idea. It's like, yeah, this is basically the same stuff that we've been digging in. they thought that the T-pillars that were sticking up were like intrusive burials.
Yeah,
they were tombstones.
Medieval period tombstones that were intrusively put into the midden.
So nobody was going to give you funding to go like dig into those those graves, because it was kind of just considered, these are big, they're carved, they can't be that old.
Yeah, they couldn't imagine that the work of the T-pillars could be possibly associated with the PP&A stuff, right?
So they thought they were intrusive. In other words, that somebody at a much later time, like in the medieval period, went and dug into the midden, buried their dead there, and put a tombstone there, carved the tombstone.
Specifically because there's not a whole lot of great places to bury people in these regions. It's like we were saying, it's mostly like a thin layer of topsoil on top of hard bedrock, right? So,
and to kind of give them a little bit of credit here, if an archaeologist did go do a little bit of digging and categorizing the midden, they would notice that the midden itself was jumbled up. The stratigraphy of the midden was jumbled up. If they took a piece from close to the top and then a piece a little bit lower and it had like organic materials and had them carbon dated, they could be inversed. The deeper one was younger than the one close to the top, which would suggest that midden had been disturbed in the past, which is exactly the case.
Yeah, it is.
Because the middens had been disturbed in the past, but it wasn't for burials.
Right. So it was because they collapsed inward. Yeah.
So what caused the discovery of the site then?
Well, Klaus Schmidt had been digging in an area nearby. I can't remember the name of the site, but it was a place that eventually got flooded, right, on purpose. It was part of a reservoir. So they were digging in this area. He was very young. He was young. He was kind of like, this was
an intern, maybe.
Intern or a student. And so he was, because of the work they did on this site, and it was kind of the thing where like, the government's like, hey, we're going to build a reservoir of water. There's a known archaeological site here. Can we get a team out there to sort of categorize it and really investigate it before we flood the whole place, right? So they went out and did a bunch of digging, and they found carvings, they found pillars. So Klaus Schmidt is now familiar with this style, and then the place was flooded, and then he began to investigate rumors, basically, of other similar sites in the area, and there had long been this rumor of this site, and our guide told us this funny story of a farmer who was trying to convince somebody in the government that he had something on his land, and he got his donkey. The whole story is like the guy had dug up, or his plow pulled up a small statuette, stone, heavy.
The Schindlerfa man, or what's his name?
Yeah, I can't remember what his name was. Yeah, well, not that one. That one's huge. This is a similar one, but it was, but he puts it on his donkey and he goes like 50 kilometers.
He cleaned it.
Yeah, he cleaned it up, put it on his donkey, and took it 50 kilometers on trails or whatever to show it to some people, and they were just like, whatever, this is a modern artifact, and and he was pissed off, the farmer was. But Klaus Schmidt gets wind of these kinds of things, and he goes out and investigates the site. He sees some tops of the pillars, and he's like, okay, this looks like this other place I dug in that's now flooded. And so he started working there, and I think he's quoted somewhere as saying, like, once he had done an evaluation of the site, he realized, I'm going to spend the rest of my life here because it's a huge site.
Yeah.
And he did. He spent the rest of his life there.
So did the site that went underwater, was that also contemporary with Gobekli Tepe?
I can't remember. I think it's supposed to be a little late. It's not as old, but it is old. More like 9,000 years or something like that. Don't quote me on that. But
right.
But it had similar features, similar artwork, and it was kind of at the time, an outlier. It was like, wow, this is way older than we expected. It has much better work than we expect for something this ancient.
But not a game changer.
He was what?
Not a game changer.
It was kind of a game changer.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was putting a kind of stonework and carving, and pillar building that was not expected at that very early date. But then Gobekli Tepe just sort of overwhelmed it and pushed it back even farther. Yeah.
And you gotta wonder what role the end of the Ice Age caused in these things.
Yeah, there is.
That's another. I would just say this. That's another interesting part of the midden mound of Gobekli Tepe is when they were excavating it, they found thousands of grinding stones for grain and other
way more than, like, when you read the papers and they're like, there's way too many, right? 7,000, I think, is what they said. Yeah, over 7,000 grinding stones. They're like, this. This implies.
So for a population, this is what's cool. This is what I like about these archaeologists. They were like, wow, this is so many grinding stones. So we need to do some research. How much can you grind? How much can one person grind in one of these stones in a day? So they made their own basalt, mortar and pestle type. There's sort of boat stone, and then your grinding stone.
I get some poor college grad.
Yeah, and they give them these grains, and they just grind.
They grind this all day.
They grind for 8 hours. So there's somebody who's never hand ground stuff is grinding this stuff for 8 hours in a day, and they produced enough ground grain to support so many. So they do the statistics, and they're like, okay, one person grinding 8 hours in a day could support this many people. And so then when you figure it out to how many grinding stones, they're like they are mass producing food on a scale that is way more than the population that can be imagined from the size of this site.
Yeah.
So what is going on here? And this is another thing about the midden. They're finding an immense amount of animal bones from feasting, from cooking and all that. So this is kind of where a little bit of the narrative came from. This was a ceremonial site where they threw these massive feasts because they found so much. It's like manufacturing.
Yeah. Right.
Giant production line up there. And of course it's on the highest peak in that mountain range.
Yeah. And there's also implication of agriculture at least going on somewhere else that was being brought there, because they did a very interesting study. I can't remember the term, but there are these little microscopic silicates that build up in plants that basically the silicate forms a little like a sheet of quartz or something in between the cell walls of the individual cells of the plants. These you can't see them without a microscope. But you can look at them when there's no plant material left. You can look at these things in the soil. You take a sample of the soil, you look at it under a microscope, and you can kind of count them. And generally, you can tell which ones came from the bottom of the plant, the middle of the plant, and the top of the plant, because the cell shapes are different. And so the shapes of these little pieces of silica are different based on the cells that they were in between. And here at Gobekli Tepe, they found a ton of this stuff, but only from the tops and the middles of plants, of grain plants, basically, implying, there's no root stuff. In other words, somebody had harvested a bunch of stuff and brought it there and processed it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
And then, of course, when you consider the landscape, when you're there, you're looking around, and it's, like I said, the bedrock is exposed everywhere.
But was it like that, 14,000 years ago?
So they've done some studies, and there are some suggestions that there may have been, what was the wording? It was like a slight cover of dirt or soils or whatever over the tops of this.
Yeah, like a thin cover. But there were rivers. So, yeah. There were rivers and creeks that are no longer. You can see where they were when you're standing up and looking down on the hills. You can see, okay, that used to be a river. It's just long gone. It's completely dry now.
Yeah, it's possible that there was forest, there was trees, or at least
down in the valleys
and all that kind of stuff. So that long ago, there could have been a completely different situation with the soil. In any case, they dug down to the bedrock to build the site. Yeah. So they're bringing all of this stuff from somewhere, maybe down in the valleys, who knows.
And the nearest source of water to Gobekli Tepe is far away. You got to walk a couple of kilometers to get down to where the water is.
That was the other interesting thing, is right when you're approaching it, the same place Russ was talking about, this barren circular enclosure that had no standing pillars, that was exposed, and off to the side of the main mound, there are two large pits, almost like you think of hot tub sized holes in the bedrock that look like they were intentionally cut, maybe as water reservoirs. I don't know if they've been excavated. We don't really know how deep they are.
Yeah. Similar at Karahan. You could see somebody had gone to a lot of trouble to cut long channels in the bedrock that led to big cistern looking things, so they were channelizing water possibly off the hill to fill up these cisterns. It's just,
plus the enclosures themselves definitely would have held water.
Yeah, they would.
If it rained, those enclosures, at least the cut portion of the bedrock would have just held water.
Yeah, 3 or 4 inches at least.
Yeah, which would have been beautiful.
Yeah.
A little reflecting pool.
Yeah, you can imagine before standing there at night with the night sky over you and the pillars there, and this perfect pool of water reflecting the night sky on the ground in the pillars. It would have been amazing.
And the pillars reflected in the pool. It could have been, quite an observatory.
Yeah.
What do you think about alignments?
Well, I only know that Graham would state that there are definite, precise alignments. Now, I haven't seen evidence of that in the literature, but of course, Martin Sweatman also has talked about alignments. So I don't know personally.
Yeah, we've read a bunch of archaeological papers on the site. No, I haven't
Not
seen
much
anybody really
archaeoastronomy.
talking about alignments yet. I'm sure somebody's going to get around to it, but
Well,
so far,
I know Andrew Collins connected it to Cygnus, but as Robert Schock said, Andrew connects everything to Cygnus, so it's hard to say.
But I mean, so this is part of Graham's, complaint about the cover over it. That you can't go up there at night and do archaeoastronomy because there's this huge tent, basically. It's a beautiful structure, but it's this giant tent type thing over the top of it. So you couldn't stand there and kind of look across pillars and see what might be rising on the equinox or.
Yeah, and if there are alignments, it's going to be a complex one because everything's round.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And this is the other thing. It's been rebuilt. I believe it seems very obvious that rebuilding has been done. We had talked about these cobblestone walls earlier. In many cases, the cobblestone wall will be going along and then it comes to a T-pillar. The T-pillar is actually broken in half, but still standing, and it's actually standing on being
supported by big cobbles.
Flat rocks of cobbles and maybe even other sections of other broken T-pillars that are built into the cobblestone wall, and sort of the cobblestone wall goes around this top section of the T-pillar to hold it, and the top of that T-pillar kind of matches the tops of the other T-pillars, so it seems clear.
It looks like ancient reconstruction.
In very ancient times, possibly 12,000 years ago, somebody was reconstructing these sites,
standing it up, building walls,
fixing broken pillars. It's not going to be easy to determine anything definite.
Yeah, alignments would have to be done with the bedrock cuts. I mean, you can't really, because the position of the pillars is in question. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Similar to foundation measurements, like a lot of sites in Egypt have been taken down, or they fell over. There was an earthquake and they were rebuilt in ancient times, and they fell over and were filled with sand, and they've been rebuilt by archaeologists in modern times. And you can't really, it's hard to do any alignments with them. But if you could clear everything away and get down to the foundation, which no one has moved, right, since the original builders, then you could use that to maybe do some alignments. But it's tough when it's been built and rebuilt and used and reused so many times.
Well, we were pretty much out of time.
Oh.
But
wow, that was cool.
We can talk about Gobekli Tepe all day.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it felt like that just flew by. So we can continue talking in the Patreon segment.
Sure, for sure.
And you guys are planning another tour to Turkey at some point?
We are. No definite dates yet, but we're definitely going back, and we're including the whole Cappadocia region. And I'm trying, I think this is going to happen, to also, because it's nearby, also get out to the, I can't remember what it's called, the Phrygian Valley, maybe, where the cart ruts are, near the Cappadocia stuff.
Oh, okay.
There's a whole bunch of cart ruts in Turkey that are way less well known than the ones in Malta that I really want to walk around and see.
Same type of thing, though?
Yeah. But possibly far better preserved.
I already solved it. It's like when they wanted T-pillars, they just cut them out of the bedrock in lines, in parallel lines.
Yep, that was it. You got it.
One other thing I'll say real quick before we go to the Patreon segment, just because I want your regular listeners to know this. Yeah. Like, we're told, we've talked all about these pillars and the beautiful bedrock flat cuts and how they left the platforms for the tall T-pillars and this amazing carving. We're told they did all of this with flint.
Of course.
Flint tools
and bone.
Well, if they did, that's pretty damn impressive.
Yeah. Huh?
If they did, that's pretty damn impressive.
It is, yeah.
In its own way,
Yeah.
But yeah, seems highly unlikely.
It seems unlikely.
So where can people find you guys? And if they are, where do you announce like the tours and stuff?
We're doing the tours we do, we're doing most of them with Ben. We've really teamed up with Ben from Uncharted X. So if you're interested in the the Egypt stuff we're doing, a lot of times the details are all posted on his website, unchartedx.com, but the people can find us. Brothers of the Serpent is the name of our podcast. We have a website, brothersoftheserpent.com. We're on YouTube, Spotify, and anywhere else. If you want to watch videos, we're on YouTube. If you want to hear the podcast, if you're listening to Where Did the Road Go, we're on all the RSS feeds. So
yeah, and especially if you want to see more about this stuff we're talking about with Gobekli Tepe, we did a series.
It's not all series,
not all in a row, but on YouTube we are showing videos and footage and photos of the stuff that we've found and trying to illustrate all of these points that we're making.
Yeah,
with the footage that we got. So you can find that on our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you.
Where Did the Road Go is brought to you by our Patreons. And I'm going to give a shout out to all my Patreons right here because you really do help make this possible. And a special shout out to those pledging $10 or more. Greg Ross, Illuminati, Leanne Cherry, Matt in Delaware, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, Andrew Nichols, Matthew Sproul, Tim, Midnight Review presents Christine, a blue second gen MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Patricia Guy-Quinta, Alex Whitcomb, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Andrew Malone, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Bright Rectangle, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, Land of the Crazy and Communicable, CJ, Greg Parmenter, Diane B., MTK, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, History and Coffee, J. Otto Bullitt, Jack Huntington, James Lindsay, Jim and Sophie, John Mattingly, John Bracken, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Linda, Linz Jackson K., MJ Armstrong, Mark Brady, Mr. Weird, Oli Andre Olar, Paul Jeffries, Philosopher of Mirrors, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Sam Sharon, Schmooples, Devourer of Mortal Souls, Stacy Sherwood, Stevie Norman, Strange Stories with the Seeker and the Skeptic podcast, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, Thunderboy, Tyler Glimstead, Varosh K., Vincent Trewell, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Ren Collier, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDT Skunkworks, and Craig Sagastumi. Thank you all so very, very much. So there is a Patreon-only segment where we continue this conversation and get into some other stuff as well. That'll be up for patrons. If you're hearing this in a non-patron feed, it's already up. So go subscribe. It's only $3. And you get a bunch of extra content every month. Every week you get extra content for the most part. It's very rare I don't put at least one thing up a week. All right. Man, I've lost track of who I've thanked as far as new patrons go. So I'm going to go by the list that has popped up in front of me, which is Jack Huntington, Ryan, and Schmooples, Devourer of Mortal Souls, who I feel like just resubscribes every month, so I get to say that. And that's kind of fun. Schmooples, Devourer of Mortal Souls. All right. Hope everyone enjoys the extra content. I am working on some other stuff, show-wise, to put up. I got some videos I'm working on, and some. We're going to do something with the documentary. I'm not sure exactly when. I gave out some copies at Alvatwitch, and I'll be making those available too at some point. I know Chris is going to be entering it in some film festivals, so we may wait to make it publicly available till after that. I don't know. We're still kind of just playing around with it a little bit. So that will be coming soon as well. And I will hopefully see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.